following is a message from Christ Central Manchester, a church that meets in the heart of Manchester in the UK. To find out more about us, please visit www.christcentral.org.uk.
My name's Dave. I'm one of the leaders here at Christ Central. I've been here since 2001 when I first moved up. I moved up for 2 years. My maths is so poor that I haven't worked out that was long ago expired. But we stuck around because we found something that was worth investing our whole life into. Jo was finishing her university time in Norwich, and the plan was that when she finished, we would head off back down south. And then we realised that actually the north is in fact God's powerhouse, and that there were... It's always worth stealing somebody else's phrase, isn't it? But there was loads here that we wanted to be part of, and you as a family are the main reason why we are still here. So I don't know, I feel like I should thank you in some way for being my family. Now look at some of you and you don't deserve it. So over the last few weeks, Keith has been kind of opening up to us I guess where we feel God is shaping us and calling us, and in some way giving us a window into what the future will look like for us as a church. And at the core of it all was this notion that it all starts and finishes with intimacy with Jesus. That from intimacy with Jesus, actually all the other things pour out. That it's not a set of rules, it's not a little target card that we're looking to tick. That at the top right there is intimacy with Jesus, and that from that we expect other things to kind of flow out. So from that we felt that there would be this sense of new birth amongst us. That from that we felt that we would be equipped to kind of shape and serve the two cities of Salford and Manchester. From that we felt that we would be able to open doors for the poor and the marginalised through our food bank, through our CAP project, and as we press the door into these welcome boxes for asylum seekers, but that it all grows out of this one centre point of intimacy. And what we're saying today to you is through our worship and through my time talking to you, that intimacy, that connection, that relationship with Jesus is actually life-changing. As somebody alluded to, it's not just a case of kind of the cross and then so many, 60, 70, however many years later you end up in eternity and that's what the deal is. That the period in between is actually different as a result of connection and relationship with Jesus. And that any time we're telling somebody who isn't part of the church or about God or about the gospel, what we're really telling them is about our connectedness with the King of the universe. And that feels like a remarkable claim, doesn't it? Maybe in this moment, actually, you're sitting there kind of reflecting back on the last week, thinking, goodness me, I wonder quite how connected I've been. And so how much can I share? But the reality is that I want to kind of extend it in a particular direction today, because what I want to tell you is that intimacy with Jesus will change your existence in a remarkable way. That actually, in being connected with Jesus, we have a power, an ability to say no to those things in our lives that we know we should be saying no to. Too many no's in that sentence. Say no to the things in our lives that we know we should be saying no to. Because the reality is it's probably a daily thing for each of us, but certainly a weekly thing for every single one of us, where there will be moments where we know that there is a temptation or an urge to do something that we feel we probably should not be doing. And we feel that there is a temptation or an urge to neglect something that we probably should be doing. It's there. It's in every part of our lives, and because we don't want to look too kind of stony-faced, we maybe neglect talking about it a little bit. But the reality is every single one of us experiences it, and it's a nonsense if we try and pretend like we don't. Or in some way we neglect it. But actually, spoiler alert for you, okay? I hesitate putting this in because I worry that maybe you won't listen to the rest of the talk. But what I'm going to be saying to you today is that Jesus is the answer. Relationship and intimacy with Jesus is the only answer to solving those things that we most struggle with, to solving those things that maybe when we look in the mirror, we're most disappointed about. The Bible tells us that God has given us everything we need for life and godliness through the knowledge of Him. Everything through the knowledge of Him. Everything through connecting with Him. Not a rule book, just a connection, just a relationship, just a bond. I'm going to take you in the Bible to Samson, who's in the book of Judges. And actually we're going to pick up the end of the story. So we're picking up from verse 20 of chapter 16. If you've got a Bible, feel free to follow. Otherwise, I'm just going to read it to you, so don't panic. Delilah said to Samson, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he woke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself." I feel like I should have got somebody bigger, a butcher, to come and read that line when you're talking about Samson, but I'll try and kind of well myself up. Okay, ready? "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison. Now a while later, the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, "Our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hands." And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, "Our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has killed many of us." And when their hearts were merry, they said, "Call Samson, that he may entertain us." So they called Samson out of his prison, and he entertained them. And they made him stand between the pillars. It's a desperately tragic description, is it not? Desperately, desperately tragic. Here was a guy with absolutely barrel loads of gifting, barrel loads of ability, reduced to the humility of being mocked, bound up, eyes gouged. You see, he should have been so much more than that. This guy has a remarkable start in life. An angel went to his barren parents and said that he was going to be born. Parents that could not have children. An angel appeared. Now, we all know some pretty famous stories in the Bible where that kind of thing happens, yeah? So any time when an angel's appearing, telling that you're going to have a child, you know something significant follows. Would have been enough maybe to capture my attention as a young man. But actually there was more to it. This angel said to his parents, "No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. And he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines." So there's this remarkable description of what his life will be like. He is labelled a Nazarite. I don't know how many of you know what that is, but this was a particular group of people that would commit themselves to God. That they would be set apart purely to kind of press into God. And that would affect everything. So it says no razor would touch his head, because they would keep their hair as a sign of commitment, that it would just grow and grow and grow. It would affect the way they ate and drank. It would affect their relationships. And actually, for Samson particularly, God says he will defend God's people. This is in a time of history where God's people are being kind of gradually overrun by the Philistines, who are expanding and expanding into their territory. And it's quite subtle, because they just kind of absorb into their communities and then rise up and find that actually the autonomy of those communities is gone and suddenly under Philistine rule. And what God had kind of said was that Samson would be the guy that would bring all of that to a head and kind of bring it to that conflict point where God's people would be protected from the Philistines as he pushed them out. And this is an amazing kind of description of a guy whose whole life was meant to be set apart for God. The Nazirite lifestyle was considered to be so strict, so set apart, so consecrated, so much abstaining that they, over time, it became a temporary thing. People decided it was too much to live your whole life in this way, so they would make it a temporary thing. So they would use their long hair as a sign that it was the end of their Nazirite commitment, and they would cut it. So they'd allow the hair to grow, and then they would cut it to say, actually, I've now finished my time of consecration, my time of being set apart, and I'm going back to my normal life. And it would often be for a season where they wanted to achieve particular things, and they felt they needed the blessing of God to achieve something remarkable. It was a tough gig. And the reality is, in our kind of X-Factor culture, we're all kind of screaming out saying, love me, I want to be famous, I want somebody to say that I'm special. It was just hideous. I don't know how many of you have kind of been watching X-Factor, but it was kind of on in the background last night as I tried to commit myself to doing something worthwhile with my life. And there are these people on stage kind of staring Simon Cowell in the eye saying, love me, Simon, love me. This means everything to me. People that have given up jobs and careers and lives just to kind of be recognised in some way. And he's, how desperate. And you know, they might have seen some people that would have looked at Samson and thought, oh, isn't he the lucky one? Set apart to be something special. But actually, sadly, or happily, or whatever it was, Samson didn't want it. Samson didn't want this life. We're sitting there thinking, how can that be? He's appointed by God, how could he not want it? Actually, he didn't want to be set apart from everybody else. He didn't want to have to abstain from the things that he wanted. And I wonder, we're talking about Samson a lot. I wonder, what about you? Have you counted the cost, if you like, of who you are meant to be? See, the Bible describes you as a chosen race, handpicked, chosen, God's people, plucked, a royal priesthood and a holy nation, a people for his possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvellous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Now, you, my friends, are set apart. You are set apart. And have you counted what that will look like? Because reality is, I don't stand here today as Dave scrubbed up, although I do have shoes on and trousers. I don't stand here today. For people that are visitors, that's really awful, isn't it? Now you're thinking, why did he feel the need to draw out the fact that he's wearing trousers? I'll take it off the tape later. But basically, I wear shorts a lot, my kids wear shorts a lot, and it's a bit of a standing joke. Okay? So there we go. So I'm wearing trousers. Okay. So I don't stand here as Dave scrubbed up, having had a ballet. I stand here as actually a new creation, newly set apart. And so do you. But actually with that comes a cost, comes a sense of abstaining, comes a sense of making wise choices, new choices that maybe you wouldn't naturally make. See, the reality is we can be so keen on being culturally relevant that we lose all our flavour. We can be so unwilling to kind of exercise self-control over the things that our body wants that actually we miss the mark totally. It comes to a head for Samson. There's a whole life story for him, but you haven't got a lifetime, so we'll just go for this bit. It comes to a head for Samson with Delilah. And on the surface, it looks like a story about sex. It's not. Da-da-da. Maybe that's not what you thought. actually all the sex, all the anger, all the violence, and all the mistrust that goes on in this guy's life actually is just a symptom of what's really going on inside. If you don't believe me, actually reality is we get to the Delilah story where it comes to a head, and actually he's already had sex. He's already had it at least twice that we know of. So that this story isn't just about sex. Sex is a symptom of something else that's going on. So let me read to you. We'll pick it up, 16, verse 4. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound, that one could subdue you." It's a real fascinating game of cat and mouse that then ensues, because Samson decides that he's going to have a little game. He likes his game, Samson. His first marriage broke down because he got a little bit bolshy with his family and decided to start setting them riddles, and the whole thing turned to carnage. Not learned his lesson, so now decides to lie there with Delilah, playing more games. She's saying, "Tell me what it is that makes you so strong." Now, you guys know the story. No razor shall touch his hair. That through his long hair, God chooses to equip him at particular times with remarkable strength so that he can defend God's people. So this is an all-play game. What does he need to do, or what does she need to do, in order for one man to be able to subdue him? After 3, 1, 2, 3. Oh, Lord. Right, we're going to try again, okay? This is actually an all-play game, not a 5-play game, okay? After 3, what does Delilah need to do in order for one man to subdue big, strong man? Samson, 1, 2, 3. There we go. It's a bit more like it. We'll try something else later and see if you've woken up. 1 second. So, what does he tell her? Well, first of all, he tells her you need to get some fresh strings from a bow. And she ties him up with fresh strings from a bow and says, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And he bursts forth and he's all butch and kind of like a rugby player and does the job. And then she says, tells her actually new ropes that have never been used, freshly bound ropes. And she kind of ties that round him and she says, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And then he bursts forth and duffs them all over. And he says, "Actually, no, you need to weave my hair and tie it with a pin." At this point, she must be getting really fed up with this guy, because like nobody is worth this much hassle. And so she ties him up and weaves his hair, puts a pin in it. "Samson, Philistines are upon you." And he bursts forth and duffs over the Philistines again. And she must be seriously worried about her credibility at this point, her ability to get any truth out of this man. And to be honest, what on earth is Samson thinking? What is he thinking? Guys, if there's one thing I would say to you today, don't play with temptation. Don't sit there with your finger in the sand, kind of just twizzling it round as if you're drawing a nice picture. The guy's lying with this woman, playing a game with his whole life. Don't play with it. Don't sit there and have a conversation with temptation as if it's some pal of yours. Don't work out how close you can get to the problem before you have to feel guilty about it. Now, we're all about not being legalists, but that doesn't mean you have to become a numbnut. Think about it. I was talking to somebody the other day, and he was in the middle of he was kind of telling me about this pattern of behaviour that had developed. And I was listening to him speak, and I said, "Do you actually want this to be any different?" He said, "Of course I do. Of course I do. I really do." I said, "Well, dude, you've got to stop waiting until the last minute to start trying to make a good decision. Because if you wait until you're staring down the barrel, having a chit-chat with temptation, you've lost it. that somewhere along the line you've got to roll the thing back and start making decisions that don't put yourself in that situation in the first place. Somewhere along the line you've got to not wait until it's late at night and you've had a drink or whatever else. I mean, that wasn't his situation, but do you know what I mean? Kind of think about, actually, what are the triggers that get me to X point? And then how am I going to roll it back so that I don't even get to the point of staring down the barrel, having a chit-chat? It really reminds me of Eve with the serpent. So there she is in the Garden of Eden, and God has said, don't eat the fruit from the tree. And the serpent kind of comes and starts to kind of wangle his little way around Eve to the point where she confuses herself. And she's like, did he say I couldn't eat it, or did he say I couldn't touch it? And so she starts to make up the rules for herself. She's actually like the very first Pharisee. You know, the people that Jesus really criticised, because she's so keen to make sure that she gets it right that she starts to put layers in front of layers in front of layers that says, actually, God says, I can't touch the fruit from the tree. God never said that. And so the serpent actually realises that he's got her engaged in a conversation. They're having a bit of chit-chat. And so then he's able to say to her, do you know what? God is holding out on you. He knows that if you eat that fruit, you'll be like him. He's holding out on you. And the description there it both baffles me, amuses and frightens me. She says, and then Eve saw that the tree was good for food. It was a delight to the eyes. The tree was a delight to the eyes. Very poetic. The tree was to be desired, and she took it. Had she only just noticed that the tree had food on it? Had she only just noticed that it was pretty? Had she only just noticed that it was desirable? What happened was she had a chit-chat with temptation. And that actually somewhere along the line she needed to take a leaf out of Joseph's book. So you know that moment where Joseph is serving in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife decides she takes a shine to Joseph, and so she tries to entice him to come and sleep with her. And what does he say? He says, my master's given me everything. Why would I do that? Well, that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Conversation over. My master's given me everything. Why would I do that? That's all you need to say. You don't need a big, long conversation. In that moment where temptation comes, my master Jesus has given me absolutely everything. Why would I do that? It's incredibly disarming, isn't it? You don't need to have a big discussion about how close to the problem you can get. You don't need to lie there day and night upon end having a conversation about the subtlety, nuances of this temptation. Oh, I wonder how it might feel if I did it. No, my master's done everything for me. Why would I do that? No brainer. Actually, temptation is like a pint of Guinness. I'm proud of this, Liam. Thought of it myself. See, on the top it's got this white froth that promises you the world. And underneath it's just this murky melt world of like mucky, rank gunk. Any Guinness fans in the room? There are a few. Bear with me. I'll give you a different... I was not expecting you. I'm in the layabouts at the back, but you should know better. Come on. Unbelievable. Let me give you another analogy. It's like the iceberg. It's like the iceberg that hit the Titanic. That what you see on top of the water has enough truth in it that it looks like it has a veneer of goodness. And yet the 70, 80, 90% of the iceberg mass under the water is actually coming to floor your ship. For Samson, it was like this. Hey, I can handle this. If I fib to her, she'll just forget about it. And then we can get down to the good stuff. He said, actually, I'm worth this. I spent my whole time fisticuffing with Philistines, not Philippines. That'd be mean, wouldn't it? What did they do to anyone? I spent my whole time having fisticuffs with the Philistines. If I do this, man, she'll love me. And maybe I'm worth it. Nobody actually understands me. Maybe I deserve this. Here's what I think was also under the cover of it. If she cuts my hair off, I don't have to be set apart anymore. I can give up. And actually, I don't have to be set apart. I can suddenly belong somewhere. I can connect with some people. I can give up on this kind of heavy load that I feel like I'm carrying. And I don't have to be Mr. Fisticuffs anymore. I can be Mr. Lover Lover. But what was the truth? What was the dark, murky, gunky truth under the frothy promise? Well, the murky, gunky truth was this. She didn't forget. And he couldn't trust her. And he couldn't handle it. And she didn't love him. And he didn't get to keep her. And he did end up isolated and alone. Let's say those again. She didn't forget it. He couldn't handle it. She didn't love him. He didn't get to keep her. And he ended up isolated and alone. It's like kind of going to a shop and you walk in for the first time and you see the product that you want and it looks great. And you say to the guy behind the counter, how much is it? And the guy behind the counter says, for you, my friend, freebies. Take it away. You can have it. Great news. Take it away. Use my product, it wears out, it breaks, it runs dry. So I go back to the shop and I say, I bought one of these the other day. It's kind of it's worn out now. I would like another one, please. And the guy says, okay, that's fine, but it's going to cost you a little bit this time because you had one for free last time, didn't you? So we'll just take a little bit this time. Well, okay, fair enough. I wasn't expecting to have to pay, but there you go. And I take it away and I use it and I abuse it and it wears out. So I go back to the shop. And say, I've had 2 of these now. They're defunct. They're broken. I need another one. I say, okay, that's fine. You can have another one, but actually it's going to cost you a little bit more this time. And you're like, it's getting a bit steep now. But actually I've kind of got used to having this, so... yeah, okay, fine, fair enough. So you take it away again and you use it and it wears out and you go back to the shop and you say, actually, can I have another one? Really, this is your fault because they keep running out, keep breaking. And the shopkeeper says, yeah, you can have another one. Yeah, you can have another one. But actually, this time, it's going to cost you everything you've got. Everything. The whole deal, even those things you think I don't even know about, even those things that were so ingrained in your identity that you thought they would be here forever. Samson reached that point with Delilah, didn't he? He tried to fob her off, thought he had it under control to the point where it cost him everything. Now the thing is, he didn't get to that place overnight. He didn't suddenly find himself in that place as if there was no pre-warning. Because I said it earlier, he'd had previous relationships. He'd made previous mistakes. And actually, although it had got messy, he kind of avoided disaster. They were like his first few visits to the shop, if you like. But the thing is, he never learned to resolve damaged relationships. He never, ever sought wise counsel about why those previous relationships had gone wrong. He kept himself as a lone wolf. And actually, the more talented you are, the more likely it is you'll either keep other people at arm's length or they'll stick you on a pedestal and you'll remain a lone wolf, a loose cannon. And you're vulnerable at that point. You're vulnerable if you're walking through life on your own and nobody's walking it with you. And let me just say, if you're thinking, well, actually, I haven't got that best pal to kind of walk it through. I mean, we're not all lucky enough to live with our best mate or to have that kind of lifelong friend. Sometimes you just have to connect with somebody and say, do you know what, I know we don't know each other that much, but actually, I think I might be able to trust you, and I think you might be helpful to me because I need you to walk this journey with me. I need to not be a lone wolf anymore. We're not designed to be the littlest hobo that kind of travels around like this puppy. Wherever I lay my head, that's my home, and then off I go. We're actually designed to kind of walk these difficult journeys with other people. And the other thing that we never see him do, which is just absolutely bizarre, given how his life started out, is we never once see him talk to God. God miraculously births this lad out of a barren mother, gives him this incredible promise, and then we see Samson spend the rest of his life kind of doing it my way. All the other judges that we see in the book of Judges, they connect with God. Yeah, they make mistakes, but they kind of do the journey with God. And we'll see the prophets, they're all flawed individuals, but they do the journey with God. And David, there was no King David, there was nobody more flawed than him. And yet he's described as being a man after God's heart. Why? Because he did the journey with God. Then we've got Samson, who is flawed. And yet never do we see him connect with God. We don't actually see him pray until the very, very end. There's an interesting thing, because us, kind of New Testament Christians, we have our understanding of kind of the Spirit involved in our lives. And it becomes a funny thing for us. This is just an aside. You can have this for free. I'll stand over here, symbolically suggesting it's an aside. We have this funny thing, don't we, that actually we look at somebody like Samson, we say, how can God continue to use him? How can God continue to fill him with the Spirit to do all this stuff when he's such a no-hoper at other moments? Well, there's two observations. One is that actually the way the Holy Spirit connects with us is actually quite different in the New Testament. In the New Testament, we see it about kind of character transformation and bringing purity and life change. And that's all through the work of Jesus. And we haven't got time to unpack it fully, but actually the work of Jesus on the cross actually is a pivotal moment in the way God connects with his people. Old Testament, though, we see it time and time again, God filling people that are really a little bit dubious and using them to fulfill his purposes. Now, my second point about that, actually, it's incredible good news for you. Because you're a little bit dubious too. Particularly some of the Guinness drinkers over there. It's incredible news for us that we look at Samson and think, how can God continue to use him? Well, that means he can continue to use you. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about in terms of continue, if you have no idea what a relationship with God actually looks like, it means he can start to use you as well. That wherever you're at in your journey, actually, he can still use you no matter how flawed you are. Kit, this is my subtle nod. I don't think any of them saw it. Hey, look at that. Hey, in this day of modern technology, I think a hand-drawn picture is still worth having. Yeah? You can't Google that anywhere. Yeah? So this is Samson. This is Samson in his moment, brought out by the Philistines for their entertainment. Now, I'm grateful to Nicky Gumbel and the Alpha Course because they talk about 4 Ps in terms of the consequences of sin. And we're going to apply those 4 Ps to Samson because we're going to make it come alive. Beck, if you want to use this on Tuesday at Alpha, you feel free. I'll email you the photo. It'll be fine. So the first thing, his decision-making becomes increasingly polluted by the repeated patterns of sin. The way he makes his decisions becomes more and more clouded. The more he neglects God, the more the pollution in his decision-making and his instincts just becomes less and less reliable. Because he started out somewhere down here and might have made a better decision if he'd been presented with Delilah there, but that wasn't where it started. Because he went through that whole journey, actually, he was ripe for it by the time he got here. And actually, that pollution began to have a power over him. You only need to ask somebody that's addicted to cigarettes or something else, maybe more substantial or scary, that actually addiction has power. It starts to shape you and control your decisions and bind you up and impact your relationships in a way that it never would have done before this whole kind of pollution started to happen. And so Samson finds himself chained. But it's a wonderful picture of the consequence for us as we find ourselves potentially chained by sin and patterns of bad behaviour. The penalty for Samson, the consequence, is that the Philistines grab him and they mistreat him and they gouge his eyes. He finds himself suddenly blind. Blind to any goodness, blind to any hope, blind to any future. Actually lost in that moment. His mind entirely polluted, entirely powerless and blind. And that blindness actually creates a huge partition between him and his maker. And that's the scariest thing for all of us, that is, as this takes hold, as this develops, actually our sin creates a partition between us and God, and actually a partition between us and the people that mean most to us. It has a tangible impact on our relationships with each other and our relationships with God. It's a scary, scary place to be. Now I'm going to pause because you've listened really nicely to me. And during the week, Jo, my wife, she's pinging into life. Do you want to come up and join me, Jo? I hadn't talked about what I was going to speak on, and around Wednesday time, Jo had felt like God actually spoke to her, and it was so in tune with everything that we're talking about today. I thought it would be really helpful for her to share it in as much time as she needs.
Hi. So we had a beautiful vase of flowers on our mantelpiece in our living room, and I was there for a while, enjoyed it, and then there was a day last week where I sat on the sofa and I just looked up at it and it was like hideous, like the flowers had drooped, gone mouldy, the water was like slimy and green, the pollen was all on the carpet, and I was like, how did that happen? Like literally, I'm sure last time I looked it was beautiful, and then somehow it had gone from that to like this minging vase of flowers, which clearly hadn't happened in one day. Like clearly in the chaos of family life, I just hadn't noticed its demise sort of over a number of days. And it had got to this point where it was horrible. And you know what lily pollen is like? It stains. There was pollen all over my nice beige carpet. So it made a mess. So I was just quite taken aback, really. And obviously it was just a vase of flowers, but I did really feel like God kind of challenged me and spoke to me about it and said, actually, it's a bit of a picture of how maybe there can sometimes be things in your life, in your heart, in your character that, you know, at one point were maybe beautiful, but actually through lack of attention or lack of awareness have turned bitter, have turned mouldy, have turned rotten, and actually you haven't noticed. And kind of wake up, you know, open your eyes and see it, notice how horrible it is. So what I needed to do, took me ages actually, cleaned up all the mess, got it, and I had to bin it all. You know, there was nothing left in there that I could have saved to use. It had to all go in the bin. Spent ages cleaning the carpet, getting all the horrible lily pollen off the carpet. And then washed the vase, and the vase is now clean and ready to use again for a new bunch of beautiful flowers. And I also felt like God spoke to me through that actually, when there is stuff that has gone rotten and mouldy, actually, there is no other option than to chuck it and bin it, which is actually really tough. I think sometimes in life we can feel like, you know, there are things that I actually quite like to hold on to, maybe little minor sins that we might think, actually, no, I'll just hang on to that. But actually felt like God say, actually, you do need to bin it. You need to chuck it. Don't even try to hold on to a shred of it, because in the end it's going to go mouldy and rotten and stain your carpet. And actually once you do that, then there's room to clean the vase for God to actually make it new and make space for something new and beautiful to come and take place. There we go.
Very much. So I had a really clever sermon written for today. You'd have loved it. You can pause on that for a moment. It's tense, isn't it? A really, really clever sermon written for today, but I felt God say to me that actually we needed here at Christ Central a second chance Sunday. I heard the phrase, as clear as I've ever heard anything in my life, as clear as one of you might come and congratulate me afterwards for a wonderful sermon. Thanks, James. I'll be waiting for you. That we needed a second chance Sunday. That actually we should be a church for the people that need a second chance. And that's me, and that's probably, almost certainly, all of us. You see, I've kind of imagined that there'll be some of you sitting there now, almost running through in your head, does God even want me at all? Sitting there saying, actually, if you knew who I am and what I've done and how I've lived my life, you wouldn't want anything to do with me. But actually, that's a lie. It sits there in the murky pot of rubbish. See, the veneer of truth in that is, yes, you've done things that you shouldn't. But the murky depths underneath is that actually the lie is nobody could ever understand. Nobody's ever experienced it like you have. And there's never a way back. But there is. Which is why God would have you know that there is a second chance someday. See, for Samson, he stood there having made a whole range of different choices. He's like mass murdered. He's neglected God's call on his life. He's slept with people that he shouldn't. He's bought women. I don't need to give you a framework of why that's a bad idea. And yet he stands here in this moment, closes his eyes, and speaks to God. And says the simplest of prayers, which is, "Oh Lord God, remember and strengthen me." See, in this moment, this isn't a remember as in God might have forgotten him. This is like a doing remember. This is like, God, remember that you are the God of all creation. You are the God who did all of those things for Abraham and Moses. That you're the God of that whole kind of Jewish history as we stand here today. That as we sit here saying, God, remember me, we can remember that whole history. We can remember you're the God that sent his son, Jesus, as a sacrifice for us. Because actually, just as Samson stood there with his arms stretched out, there was another man who stood there with his arms stretched out. There was another man whose death actually brought victory over the enemies. There was another man in Jesus whose death lifts the penalty from my shoulders. There is another man in Jesus who removes the partition. That means I can connect with the people openly around me. It means I can reconnect with God. There is another man in Jesus who removes the chains from my wrists. It means that I can move freely once again and return to my purpose. There's another man who just cleanses the pollution within me. Wherever you have been, whoever you have been with, whatever you've been thinking, looking at, saying, or doing, there is a way back to God for you today. And that way is made by the Jesus who stretched out his arms in surrender and allowed men and women to mock him. Allow people to urinate at his feet, and allow people to whip him, allow people to put him to death. As Leon said, for the joy set before him. So grateful for the passage that Johnny read, where it said, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men and being found in human form. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And now there's a joy set before you. There is a joy set before you which is to walk freely with healed eyes, with healed mind, with healed conscience, and to walk freely into relationship with God. Some of you had no idea what we were doing during that worship time, and I'm kind of almost wishing I could have spoken first, and then you could have just loved that last 45 minutes that we spent walking freely into God's presence, because that's what it is. It's an invitation for you, wherever you are, to just stand there in that moment and say, God, remember me. Strengthen me so that I can be more than I am right now. Do you know what it said of Samson after that prayer? Is that as God filled him with strength to bring that whole temple crushing down on the enemies of God's people, it said, so the dead who he killed and his death were more than those who he killed during his life. And we can struggle with that in our worldview around violence. But here's what it's saying, is that the victory that he achieved in that moment was more than any other victory in the rest of his life. Why? Because that was the moment when the first time where he genuinely connected with God. He'd been so arrogant up until that point. He'd thought he was untouchable. He thought he could stare down temptation and chit-chat it through and get his own way. He thought, had kidded himself, that this power was his own power. And yet in this moment, he knows, God, remember and strengthen me. He fulfilled more of what God wanted him to do in that moment than he did at any other moment in his life. And that could be true for you today. It's that actually in this moment of surrender, in this moment of just reconnecting with God, you might see a victory that you've never seen up until now. A victory over a habit or a sin or a temptation that's been niggling you your whole life. You might see restoration in relationships that have been broken for years and you've given up on. Who knows? You may experience God in a way you never experienced before, because he's here today, offering an outreached hand, a second chance Sunday. So who are you today? Maybe you're wilting flowers and you're looking at yourself thinking, wow, how did I get like this? Maybe you've been chit-chatting with temptation for too long. Maybe you're bruised and battered and your eyes are gouged out and you're chained up, and actually you stood there thinking, does God want me at all? Maybe you brushed with disaster and you came away clean, but it's time to learn some lessons, and it's time to open up to somebody and engage so that you don't experience the later disaster. Maybe you're still in the throes of the excitement of the onset of temptation. I just plead with you now, don't wait till it gets to carnage point. Don't wait till it gets to the point where the whole deal is smashed to pieces, because it's not nice. It is that iceberg smashing your boat to pieces. Don't wait. I couldn't plead with you more. If you're in that moment where it all feels exciting and new and like God was holding out on you, it is just the froth on top. It is just the veneer of truth. And underneath it is a murky pit of horridness. Guys, if you could stand with me, that would be brilliant. We're each just going to close our eyes. And some of you might be feeling, actually, do you know what, I'm in a great place, in which case, God bless you. Pray for the rest of the community. But the rest of us will just stretch ourselves out before God. So God, remember and strengthen me. God, I think back on my choices. I think back on the sum of who I've been. And I know that I need you. I know that the best bits of me, they were never my effort, they were yours. And that God, left to my own devices, I make myself a hole. And I want intimacy with you. I want intimacy with you that gives me a power to say no, gives me a willingness to say no, gives me a self-control to just walk away. Just in this moment, don't be passive. If you're not sure what God's saying, then just open yourself up and listen and say, God, would you put your finger on the areas of my life that need changing? But actually, I think for most of us, you know full well. You need to use this time. You need to forget about everybody else, because Samson was already being mocked. And actually, you're already being mocked. You're already being mocked if you don't deal with this today. It's true. Remember and strengthen us, God. Remember and strengthen us, God. There's some of you here that have never had a relationship with Jesus, and I'm just going to borrow a prayer from Nicky Gumbel, and I'm going to pray it. And if you're praying it with me, I'd love you, while everybody else has got their eyes closed, to just stick your hand high in the air that says, God, I need this intimacy. I need this freedom that this man is talking about. It says, Lord Jesus, I'm sorry for the things that I've done wrong in my life. Please forgive me. I now turn from everything which I know is wrong. Thank you that you died on the cross for me so that I could be forgiven and I could be set free. Thank you that you offer me forgiveness and the gift of your Spirit. I now receive that gift. I choose to receive the gift of the Holy Spirit so that my life might be eternally different. Please come into our lives, God. Please come into our lives, Lord. Do you know that image of kind of playing with your finger in the sand is something that came back to me again and again and again as I was preparing. And I know that for some of you, that is where you've been at. You've been sitting there playing with your finger in the sand, seeing what you could dabble with, play with, enjoy the textures. It's time to stop. It's time to step back. It's time to repair that intimacy with God. God, I pray for each person in the room that they would know that you want them. Do you know what? It's not just God that wants them. I want you. The church wants you. And I'm not even talking about don't ask, don't tell. I want to be able to look you in the eye, see the best and the worst of you, and everything in between, and still choose to love you. Do you know, if you knew the sum total of all my choices, you never would have sat here and listened to me today. But that's the beauty of it. Because we don't find restoration and intimacy with God and then remain paupers. We become princes. We become more than conquerors. We become a royal priesthood, a holy nation. We want to journey with you into freedom. We want to journey with you into God's family. We want to journey with you into joy and rescue.